a little bit of information around when they should be used. I probably should have done that sooner, but I will be working on that for some point tomorrow. So your missing or illegible provider signature credential, that one's your
Monica,
typical. Yes.
Can I jump in real quick? I apologize.
Absolutely. No worries, please.
I do have the ability to, and I'm not sure how reliable this is, but I do see that there's a number of people. The GoToWebinar tells me if somebody has the screen inactive. In other words, maybe they have it in the background, and the viewer is not in the foreground. Maybe they're working on another Word document or something like that. If you are here and you are on this training, if this is not a reliable thing, then forgive me for saying it, but there's just so many that the system is indicating have something else in the foreground of their computer. So if that's the case, I've made a list, and if you come back with a significant number of systems questions, we'll probably have a discussion about discontinuing on the project. So if you are on this training, please bring the screen to the foreground so you're watching what Monica is demonstrating. And again, I have made notes on the names, because if you come back and ask for additional training when you didn't watch the first time, we don't have time for that on a 10-day project. So I apologize for jumping in there, Monica, but I just
No, that's fine.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and continue to talk a little bit about the error flags. The missing or illegible signature is going to apply when you have any signature that does not meet the criteria for either electronic or handwritten signatures. And if you have a record that is signed, but it is signed more than 180 days from the date of service, you will indicate the missing or illegible provider signature or credential, and you can make a comment to indicate what the issue was. The DX listed, but not monitored, evaluated, or assessed or treated, is intended to be used for circumstances where an HCC is in the assessment of the record but does not have associated meat. So the provider listed the diagnosis in their assessment, but they did not include any color or tamper or meat or any other support for it. The EMR only diagnosis listed only in the problem list or PMH without meat. This is an example where you have a condition that is anywhere other than the assessment. It is chronic, it is an HCC, but it does not have any meat. We would use this error flag. So there are 7 chronic conditions that CMS always allows us to capture without meat, but as we know, there are other conditions that are also chronic. So perhaps if the patient has documentation of seizure disorder in the past medical history, but there is no supporting meat, that would be an example where we would abstract the code and append this error flag. Unsupported diagnosis will only be used in one specific circumstance, just one. That example is for a BMI that is 40 and above, which is the only BMI that risk adjusts. And then there is no documentation of obesity associated to that. So coding guidelines tell us, and coding clinic tell us that in order to code a BMI, that we have to have an associated clinical interpretive diagnosis, whether that's obesity, morbid obesity, overweight, underweight, malnourished, whatever that case may be. So in this example, should you encounter a BMI that is an HCC, so 40 or above, you will code it with the unsupported diagnosis flag and make a comment in this additional note section that says associated obesity not present. And then you will apply to this diagnosis. There's no other circumstance that we would abstract a code that is unsupported. So if it is an acute condition, and there's no supporting meat for it, or there's conflicting documentation, anything that does not fall into one of the other two categories, we would not capture it. Our goal is to provide the client with a file of valid diagnoses that could be submitted um, with intention, whereas unsupported diagnoses other than that BMI could put them at risk. The other error flag that we would use would be this patient name or date of birth missing. So this is that secondary identifier. It is okay to code the record, but we just want to flag it to say, hey, we're missing that secondary identifier. Usually that's the date of birth. Missing provider name would be in the example where you have a handwritten progress note. It is signed, but the written provider name is not present. And then, of course, illegible handwriting. Unfortunately, we still have people writing handwritten progress notes. So as long as we have handwritten progress notes, we will have chicken scratch. And as long as we have chicken scratch, there will be lots of people that cannot read it. So that is where we would use illegible handwriting. The last common error flag that we'll see here is this one at the bottom. Provider on claim is not same as the documenting provider on the chart. So we all know that when we're coding medical records, usually the provider that has submitted the chart has records from all kinds of sources. So internal medicine providers are going to have consults and hospitalizations and all kinds of information. So as we're abstracting the medical record, if we come to a date of service, for example, in the chart, where this provider at the top is not the provider that documented the record, we are going to come to the service provider field, and we're going to delete that name and search for the name we need. So I can do that by simply typing the letters of the provider that I'm looking for. And if I do see it, and it doesn't matter what the ID is, if you see the provider name, then you can hover, use your arrow key or your mouse and select it by hitting tab. If, however, you don't find it, then we're going to leave the provider name just as it is here at the top. So this is Thomas Cata. And that's when we would append this error flag that says provider on claim is not the same as documenting provider. We're going to go ahead and type the name of the provider and their credential and apply to all. What that will do is it will let the client know when they receive their information that Thomas Cata is not the provider that submitted this diagnosis. It was this other provider. And so please be aware when you're matching up to your data, this is where it should come from. So that wraps up the individual face-to-face encounter error flags or impairment flags, commonly known. And that wraps up actually the demo of the coding application. It is very simple, it's intuitive. So at this stage, what I'll do is we will open up 2 questions. First, I'll start by addressing 1 or 2 things that are here in the chat window. So firstly, once we wrap up the training, Doug will give you guidance on who the right contacts are for what things. He will also direct you to the location in which you can find all of the project-specific documentation, and you will need to look out for information about your username, password, and the URL. So we'll address those items at the end. Right now, we're going to address questions related to the project itself, such that it's related to the application or something more in line with clarification. So this project is for 2015 dates of service only, so you will use ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes as applicable. All of the guidelines will be provided. So you'll have the Centauri best practice coding guidelines. You'll have you will have the project-specific guidelines, which are essentially clarifications or caveats. You will have an FAQ document, and you will have the mappings for both ICD-9 and ICD-10. So those will be available to you in order to proceed with the process. I am working on some of those error flags and some screenshots, so that will come later. So at this time, I will ask Doug if he's ready to either make any announcements or open the lines up for any questions.
First, my earlier announcement about being able to identify people who did not have their screen in the foreground, I got a number. First of all, a lot of those disappeared where people brought it to the foreground, and other people typed legitimate reasons why it was appearing that way. So thank you. And I didn't mean to sound too strong, but we have 450,000 charts and 10 days, so we can't be retraining people and stuff like that. So, but a number of people indicated that they were keeping a Word document open to take notes and stuff like that. So all legitimate things, and so thank you for responding and providing that information, providing insight. So thank you to those people. I did see a question, and Monica just answered it, about ICD-10. As you know, the transition was 10/1/15, so dates of service up until 9/30 will be ICD-9, and dates of service after 10/1 will be ICD-10.